How dare you? I said, how dare you?
I know.
All right, we are on air, so I'm going to go ahead and welcome everybody to the Thursday, April 4th meeting of the City Council Business and Community Affairs Committee. Today, we have one item on our agenda, and that is a discussion regarding landscape requirements for commercial and residential developments. And I don't believe that we have a presentation from staff today, so this is just going to be an open discussion. And so kind of the impetus for bringing this item forward was I had several citizens reach out to me and kind of, talk about the historic tree canopy we have in the college campus area, and really just lamenting that that is not citywide, that we don't have, in our newer neighborhoods, we don't have the trees, we don't have kind of the historic, kind of picturesque tree canopy that you see in collegiate towns. So really, this is just a discussion to talk about what it would take to get there. The goal is not to do something that's cumbersome, obviously, that creates a burden on developers, that is anything that dissuades development, but I really feel like this is something that is a value add to all of these projects, and if we construct it the right way, we should be able to bring everybody along. So with that, I'm just going to open it up to an open discussion. Anybody have any thoughts or questions or things that, might be burning topics on this? Please, Councilmember Schuler.
Just, I guess, questions about, because I know that we have requirements, at least for residential developments, that like on trees and, having trees in the front and all that kind of stuff. But I know that oftentimes what I hear about those requirements is that, a developer will put in the required tree, and then it dies. And then they're not replaced. And so it's one of those just like, little trees, and then the homeowner doesn't know how to care for it, or it's not maybe a tree that's conducive to the weather here, or something like that. Like I've heard people say like, yeah, they put them in, but then they're dead in a couple of years. And, what is the benefit really of that?
Yeah, and to that point, I mean, do we just need to increase the size of tree that they're required to put in from a 1-inch to a 3-inch, something that adds a little more survival rate possibly to it? And
Or some native
Absolutely.
trees, like the ones that are more hardy for the area. Like I know we talk a lot about that with city landscaping that we're providing within, the various different districts and things that we're doing. So if we just want to be more cognizant of what recommendations we might have related to those kinds of.
Yeah, and I think that's really my goal with this conversation is like, let's tease out the things that might be pressure points, that might be opportunities to expand or, upgrade the program a little bit. And again, not to create a burden, but this is a value add for these projects.
I would
So-
also say too, like I understand, we look at like the historic district, right? And the way that is designed and kind of zoned with like the setbacks and the trees and like, and a lot of the things that we're talking about, we're trying to move away from a lot of those types of requirements, just
Sure.
in terms of like density. And so yes, they're super picturesque. They've got, all of the street trees and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of the conversation that we've had as a council is not necessarily geared to creating
Sure.
that. So like, I don't know what is the juxtaposition of trying to get more dense and, but also requiring some things in terms of like that urban tree canopy, and thinking about how does that benefit the community in terms of like the heat and all that kind of stuff. So like those are just things that are like bouncing around in my mind, is like, how do you do both?
Yeah, I think instead of just having just blank setbacks that are just a void in the space, you designate that land to be a tree lawn. Like that is where you plant the trees. And now we've got a zone in front of every property. That's where the trees go. And again, creating that canopy. I could go on and hours about the benefits of trees, monetarily, socially, just environmentally. There are just so many benefits that having trees on your project creates. And so, yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. We really have tried to be intentional about moving buildings closer to the street, creating that more walkable, dense, urban kind of environment. So these are things we're going to have to reconcile, and I think it's a great point. Councilmember Grant.
In that line of thought, right tree, right place, but these are new developments, so most things might be buried. I don't know how you would incentivize using local or native trees. Just two off the top of my head, red buds. They're also small and can go be a street tree easily. Not so much a bur oak, but in, the suburbs, a bur oak might be nice because they get big. I have one in my yard. It's over 80 years old. It's massive. It provides a lot of shade. I hear from the school, we love that tree. So, I would like to see trees that thrive and actually have that value add.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so some way to incentivize like native species that do really well here.
Well, I think you hit on an interesting point, and that you talk about. I think there's different applications for different requirements in different trees. So like a residential property is one thing, a commercial property is another, major street is probably another, and so having a set of rules kind of for all these different classifications. I love the right tree, right place time because, power lines and trees, and we hear all the trimming and all the inability to bury lines and everything. So working with what we got is going to be critical. It's going to be a heavy lift. I can't deny that. Councilmember.
Okay, so I think one of the things that is the upkeep. I agree. Is like if we require it, then we need to have some sort of requirement of upkeep and some way to enforce it too. But and making sure that what's being required to be planted is something that will actually
Right.
grow there.
Right.
And I mean, we have some really large trees in Norman, as you just mentioned, that have found a way to grow in this environment, right, for
Yeah.
80 years, 100 years. So that's one of the issues, requirement of upkeep and landscaping. And then considering the policy on preserving of existing. So if you're putting a development in an existing wooded area, finding a way to be more delicate about designing around the trees that are already there.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to remove some of them probably to build your thing, but clear cutting the entire lot and then planting new trees that are going to take 30 years to grow
Right.
is not real helpful.
Right.
And diminishes the value, in my opinion, of the property, but visually for sure. It's a property I'm less likely to go to. If it's a business, I'm less likely to go visit.
Sure.
And that's just maybe, but
No, and especially in terms of, a neighborhood.
yeah,
These people that are buying these homes want to enjoy the value of the tree. They don't want to wait 30 years to sit under the shade and, their kids are gone. They miss the window to enjoy that tree. And so, I think planting bigger trees from the very beginning, while an increase in cost, I think consumers would.
there's ways to design around.
I think so.
existing-
I agree.
Existing trees. And that goes for the city too. We've had to cut down some big trees. Project I've got a meeting at St. Thomas More about afterwards, the Jenkins project is gonna remove a lot of existing large mature trees. We're gonna plant a lot of trees with the new street, but
Yeah.
it's gonna take a long time for those trees to grow
Yeah.
and replace what we're gonna be losing. So we need to be more careful about that too if we're gonna ask the developers and the public to do it. And then the city of Moore has a new policy on street trees, requiring you got the street, and then you can have some street parking, and then you have to have trees, and then the sidewalk.
Okay.
And they're requiring it on all new streets.
I love that.
And so I see areas around Norman where some of our best tree canopy trees are in the right of way. And when something happens to them, if they get knocked down to high wind or they die, we're not replacing them in a way that I would like us to.
Sure.
And so I always think about that when I see one that's gone, and then it's like, we get one right back in there somehow.
Right.
I know that's not always possible, but those are things we should look at. The Moore policy, and then in CPTC we've recently been talking about the Hanford policy,
Right.
on the parking.
That's why I thought this was a very.
The street or the trees in the parking lots and the landscaping requirements that they have there. So I think it definitely ties into
I
that.
agree.
And I mean, we're Tree City USA 20 plus years, and I think that's a positive for Norman that we have that to tout. And when I go to other cities, and you all know that I travel around a lot and by driving, so I get to drive through and see a lot of different places. And there's a lot of towns and cities that don't have much trees, and it's like barren. And
Yeah.
I can't imagine living there. I'm like, this would be weird. I'm glad I'm getting to go back to Norman where it's,
Right.
you
Yeah, it's a
know.
quality of life issue. It
Yeah,
really
and
is.
even thankfully, some of our suburban subdivisions that are becoming 30 and 40 and 50 years old, like Old Brookhaven, now has giant
Right.
trees covering it too, and parts of Eagle Cliff even have the older parts of it have
Right.
large trees that have developed in there. So I think we can do more to preserve what we have for sure.
Well, and we've seen several residential developments come through recently that did take advantage of the existing trees and like really saw the benefit of, not clear cutting it, not trying to regrow the trees, but just taking advantage of what's there.
Making
And
that a
so,
feature of the
absolutely. And so if there's developers out there that are already doing this and we've got citizens that are, wanting us to just do a better job of it, I feel like the time is kind of now to, again, not create some overly cumbersome policy, but just do more with what we've got. I'd love to see it where there's not more than like a 50-foot gap, where there's not a tree. Like every street you drive down, there's a tree at least every 50 feet. So, Councilmember Graham.
Yeah, I was gonna say the life cycles of trees are, you might lose them to like bad weather or whatever, but then I was talking about red buds. Those are fast growing, so in 3 years, if you're planting these in cycles, you could have, blooming red buds. They're 30 to 40 year life cycle, so it'd be interesting when you have like requirements like, oh, you're gonna replace this, right? Well, who's gonna be around in 30 or 40 years when that tree needs it? On the city side, we can do that because, if we want to.
Here forever.
yeah.
Yes. But yeah, also thinking about like those bur oaks and others that take a while to grow, and kind of wondering if like there's a way to play with the life cycles of these. Like you have some trees there as you're waiting for the other ones to get bigger, and then in a certain time frame that those other ones may go because they'll die off.
Yeah.
So.
Constantly replacing them.
Yeah. So, you might not need to replace the ones that die off when your big tree gets as huge as it needs to be. So, just a thought about staggering some of this.
Sure.
And then also the policy on the parking lot trees. So, were we talking about requiring them in parking lots moving forward?
Yeah, we've talked about an incentive package to go back and retrofit, which I know, Mr. Briggs really spoke great to that about the difficulty of, going back and, with root systems and being able to like actually cut in a tree island. It's difficult to put in after the fact. And that's again why I think doing it up front is, if we're going to do it, it needs to happen on the front end of these projects.
There's a stormwater thing too.
It's a stormwater, yeah,
Those cutouts and those.
yeah.
Where did the incentives come in when you want certain trees in certain places?
There's all sorts of incentive ways and things that we can do to,
They come to us and ask us to approve their stuff, so we could be like, there's not enough trees. But
I would love, I'd love a pot of money that it was available to property owners that said, I want to retrofit my parking lot and add this many trees, and we've got, I don't know, a bucket of money. I don't know what that dollar amount needs to be like, but there's a fund that actually
Or
goes
that
and
could be a TIF thing too.
it could be a TIF thing, absolutely.
That would be a great TIF thing.
Yeah.
And I know that Mr. Briggs and Mr. Olson have been pretty successful on an annual basis putting their hands on just lots and lots of trees. Many hundreds of trees a year, I think, flow through your hands. So if you think about where we've put trees in the past and made trees available, if there is an opportunity to maybe start, 100 trees in a parking lot would, you could change the world.
Absolutely.
So we just may wanna evaluate our current tree annual distribution. And I don't know how much leeway you get in the selection of the trees we wind up with. They don't just give you stuff and we're stuck with what we get, and you guys get to go pick them out?
They'll order whatever we ask for.
Okay.
So we get money from partnership organizations and we buy them the trees. It's not.
I like that.
And it seems to be pretty regularly recurring.
Okay. Well, there's a great first step right there. And, you know, since we're already doing stuff like that, you know, Norman, we really like to be the leader on things in the state here. And so there should be another thing that we're leading on. Councilmember Schuler.
Yeah, just some comments about some things that were already said. I'm thinking about this concept too of, you know, right place, right tree. Because I know from experience that, you know, I have two mature trees one in my front yard, one in my backyard. The front one is an oak. I don't know exactly what kind, but then I have a lacebark elm in the back. It's actually a really beautiful tree. Yeah, the bark is really, really pretty. Yeah, little tiny leaves, which are kind of a pain to pick up, but they fall everywhere. But my point is going to be that as those root systems grow out, you know, breaking through sewer lines and water lines and all that kind of stuff, you know, I think maybe there's some education around like thinking about how big trees are going to grow, like what is their height, what is their lifespan, what are their root systems look like? Are you thinking about, you know, what's feeding your home in terms of infrastructure? And I guess too, like in terms of like street tree stuff, right? Like there's a lot of utilities in the right of way. So being thoughtful about depth of all of that and what does that mean for public works and there's a lot of intricacies to figuring out what that is. So
Yeah, there's not going to
It's
be a
not even
blanket
just-
solution, really.
yeah, I mean the city understands, I think, navigating at least the stuff in the right of way. But even just homeowners thinking about like where on their property makes sense based on where their utility, you know, comes in and out of their home, because that's a huge expense to,
Sure.
you know, change your sewer.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people don't realize that what you're responsible for as a homeowner, right? Like the city is responsible to the meter, and then you are responsible from the meter all the way up to your house. And then, you know, in the sewer, everything that goes in until it drops into the main is,
Right.
you know, your responsibility. And the older infrastructure, especially where like I live, Ward 4, a lot of that stuff has not been updated to
Sure.
PVC and kind of the modern, you know, it's all galvanized and clay, and like those are really easy to crush through. And
I
then
think
you lose your sewer line. Trust me, that is a pain in the butt.
And I think that's the benefit of doing street trees. It's because, you know, typically water lines are in the road.
Right.
Sewer lines are in the back of the property. So you're kind of doing street trees. You're staying away from the sewer a little bit. Definitely a concern. I'm not gonna say, especially in the older parts where everything's
yeah,
kind
just-
of it's closer together.
Just some education around that, especially like for
Yeah.
homeowners and residents, because you know, yes, mine is not. Neither of my trees are planted next to either of those things, but like
Yeah.
the root systems, and you know, I have an almost 80-year-old tree
Sure.
in my front yard, and I don't know what the back one, but like it's a massive, huge, and it's wonderful, and I love it. But it also drops a ton of acorns.
So
Also a pain in the butt.
Civic IQ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The whole name of the ball game, and I'm thinking about a couple of opportunities for our experts. My guess is there's just all kinds of wonderful information out there. Our ability to assemble it, especially for trees that kind of fit in our.
Well, and the ones that we're giving out,
Yeah,
right?
our
It's like maybe
temperature
give out
range.
like a little like, hey, this is what the life cycle of this tree looks like. Like just a little tag that
actually
goes
really
on
good.
it or something.
Yep, even
5-year, 10-year, 15-year.
yeah,
Yeah.
packages that could go out to
Maybe they do that.
HOAs and or a neighborhood alliance segment, and then of course Tiffany can work to promote that educational material through her weekly newsletter too, with links to things that we put on our website that are always available.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other thing that I was thinking about as we were talking about like incentives, we said TIF, but the other one is bid, right? So thinking about for commercial properties, like how would a bid maybe help with for the
Maintenance, definitely.
local businesses on retrofitting or, you know, the upgrades and stuff that would come from a collective pool of money from the businesses. Like that could be a really great
Yeah.
way to get that money.
I'd like to know how the UNP bid operates because, yeah, I've seen trees that have died up there and everything else is growing really good. And I assume they pull it out and replace it and,
It's the Property Owners Association, most of that is
Okay.
common area.
Okay.
And the property owners.
Okay.
And they do
For that,
actually
yeah.
invest, they do a lot of maintenance work in Legacy Park.
oh,
Bid
interesting.
pays for Legacy Park, yeah.
Okay, okay.
So we really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, obviously, the $1 million question, or hopefully a lot less of that, is, you know, how we pay for stuff like this. And so, I mean, I think that's a great angle. And Ms. Hudson, you were about to say something.
Well, I have a question, and I wanted to ask staff a question as well. So, and I just want to make sure, you guys are aware that in the building code, we currently require the tree plantings with the single, okay, just want to make sure you guys have. And then as far as the location of the water and the sewer lines, are they they're all in the front?
They are
now?
moving those to the front.
Oh, they are? Okay.
So street trees between the curb and the sidewalk, really a difficult situation. We're also starting to see OEC starting to relocate to the front in some neighborhoods. It's really a mixed bag. So to come out and try to say we're gonna do street trees, really there's a lot of areas where you're not gonna really be able to functionally do that just because of the number of utilities. We're already fighting for cramped space, and now we have AT&T and OEC fiber and
Sure.
and everybody else. The other issue I always think about, because obviously it falls in our area, is sidewalk repair. Probably, I'm gonna say 60% of the damage we see is due to tree roots. And when you put that in that small confined area, and then we also start seeing it breaking out curbs. We've got a situation with utilities right now where a tree's grown into an inlet, and we're having to remove the whole tree to fix the inlet. Street trees, while they're beautiful, sometimes can be a lot of additional problems.
Yeah.
And the other problem that we need to be aware of is, as council wants to move towards trying to put more electric underground, you can't do electric and trees underground. And in areas where we have street trees and we try to go underground, those trees are probably gonna come out to go underground. So street trees can be a lot of problems, and it'd be very difficult to have a blanket
Yeah.
policy to say this is what you've got to do, just because it wouldn't work. in a lot
To
of
add what
areas.
Scott is saying, when you put a tree in a right of way, and we know this because we're the ones that end up inheriting the maintenance of it, if it does become hazardous, the city is responsible for coming and either trimming that tree until it's non-hazardous or fully removing a tree. And it's not very cheap to fully remove a tree out of a right of way and kind of do what he's talking about, because sometimes we have to make sure we get certified arborists, which are more expensive if that's close to a power line, because you have to have a specialty arborist, and then also just completely removing it, the whole system from there. And also, when you start talking about incentives for retrofitting trees in the parking lot, I want to make sure that everybody's perfectly aware that it's hard, it's very difficult to properly grow
Yeah.
a tree in a parking lot to heat, especially in Oklahoma. I know in California, you're probably talking about a completely different kind of soil. If you retrofit a tree, you have to make sure you do soil amendments, add irrigation, and plant the correct tree to make sure that that tree has a proper chance to survive. I mean, when you talk about the summer heats and the long times between rains, there is a lot of, it puts a lot of stress on the tree. It's not a very great environment for it.
Well, and I think, yeah, to that point, I mean, you're spot on with that. And I think if you've got one tree in the middle of the parking lot, yeah, it's gonna be tough. But if you've got a thousand trees, you know, you've got a large number of trees creating a canopy, so that heat island effect is reduced.
Well,
and-
just for instance, if you put it in the middle of the parking lot and you have to, your tree well is 6 feet, you're probably gonna have to cut out 15 feet around there and somehow figure out how to get irrigation to the middle of the parking lot and fully amend the soil before you put trees in there and give it a proper chance
I
to
think
survive.
the irrigation, I think, is that's the real hard part.
I think Councilmember Holman also hit on it, that it's slow when it happens, like Eagle Cliff, like Brookhaven, I'm thinking of like Highland Village, Cambridge Edition. I mean, they had kind of a tree bully out there making everybody plant trees back in the early 2000s, but it's a tree line neighborhood now, you don't think it is, but it is,
Yeah, yeah.
and it worked. And I'm gonna even stick up for Lindsay Street, that there are a lot of trees on the Lindsay reconstruction that are now starting
That's
to
what I was
really
gonna
look
say.
significant.
I've
Yeah.
noticed
And we've
several
been
of
caring
them
for
starting to
a lot.
look like they're
We've
getting
done a lot of
bigger.
work, we've replanted.
Yeah.
We've made sure the irrigation works all the time. It's a struggle. It wasn't the greatest irrigation system, but we're changing it to the greatest one as we go. But there are ways to do it, so it's not all doom and gloom, but, you know, give it a little time and you start to suddenly, like everyone remembers the Berry Road.
Oh, yeah.
Well, a few years, right as soon as it happened, we went in with OET and planted a lot of Line Masters Alcovas, which don't get as big as
Right.
Sweet Gums, and they're starting to look really nice, so.
Well, I think that, yeah, it goes back to right tree, right place, you know, even where the utilities are, even the parking lot trees, yeah, I think it's been said several times, there's no silver bullet here, there's gonna be like very multifaceted approaches for different areas and different types of projects, but that's really why I wanted to have the conversation, you know.
Shakira had a
I'm sorry, I can't see back.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's okay. So when we speak of trees along the street between the curb and maybe somebody's yard or a curb in a business, we don't have trees, right? But when we do have trees, they're encased in, of course, soil, and then semen is all around them. But there are trees that never grow over a certain height or a certain width. Now, the tree in front of my apartment in New York is huge, and it's bustling the sidewalk, as someone says. So those are not good. But there's trees that will stay skinny, will still grow to a certain height, and still vegetate in the spring and summer and give you.
Yeah, I think it's the shade is really what I'm after. And so, yeah, you can be a skinny tree as long as you got a big canopy.
Yes.
Yeah,
I do
absolutely.
think we become a society of the need for instant gratification. And James, I'm glad you said that
Yeah,
about,
it's a good
you know,
point.
it takes a while, but lo and behold, those efforts wind up looking amazing. We just have to keep reminding ourselves that.
Well, and you know, this is going to sound cliche, but I mean, the reason I ran for city council is so that Norman would be great for my kids. And you know,
Start now.
plant a tree today. What's the saying? I mean, yeah, the best time to plant a tree was today. The second best time was
Yesterday.
yeah.
Yes.
I botched it, but you know what I mean.
Yep.
Best time was 20 years ago.
There you go. I knew it was something like that. Yeah, it's something. Anyway, I'm not the tree guy. Councilmember Holman.
Yeah, just like I said about, like, I think of them as an asset to the city. So like, yes, there's a cost to maintaining them or cleaning them up if they break or whatever. But they add so much value, in my opinion. Like our most valuable neighborhoods in Norman, I would say land-wise, are those neighborhoods that have the largest trees and the old houses and all that stuff. And then, like Shakira was saying with New York City, I mean, Main Street downtown is like that. It's all concrete. The buildings are all up on the sidewalk, and there's street and the parking, and there's no grass really anywhere. But we do have some now that were planted 20 years ago this year, are now as large as the buildings, some of them, and they're encased in a concrete, containment there, and they're not, to my knowledge, busting the sidewalks there. I know those are different sidewalks than your typical neighborhood sidewalks, but we have some good examples, and then what we see on Main Street with the trees we've done there, and then some of the drone shots of Norman Music Festival last year. If you haven't seen them, that show
Beautiful.
just how nice that tree line is down Main Street and how much shade it offers during that festival. Like everybody's gathered up underneath it. And then like James mentioned, the West Lindsay Street, I just was driving past down it the other day, and I noticed a couple of the trees. I was like, those are looking actually pretty, looking like they're getting pretty big now. That was something I had worried about, but it was always in the, the idea of it was having, a tree-lined, a triple canopy in the middle and both sides, and then after a couple decades, it would be a heavily tree-lined main entry into the city. So maintaining, so I do think it's important that we take care of the street trees that we have, that we look at areas where we could add more, like University North Park along 24th. There are several sections where there's trees in the median and on both sides, but there's also several sections where there's no trees at all in the median or on either side.
Right.
And that's a 2-mile stretch all the way up, and so there's lots of opportunities for that.
I agree.
The way Councilmember Holman just described that, in my mind, it kind of popped up the way we're trying to prioritize sidewalk gaps around town, and we recognize there's an opportunity because there are gaps in literally every ward. And there may be through a Google Earth kind of a look, that opportunity to find those big gaps in between street trees and maybe kind of prioritize that. And those are definitely, how to eat that whole citywide elephant, and each budget cycle and each time
Yeah.
we're doing the math to figure out how many trees we're gonna wind up with next year, just so it's there's a strategy to it.
Absolutely.
And council can have some input and help fill in those gaps in the order you guys recognize as
And
most appropriate.
I know there's an online tool, it's escaping me what it's called or where to find it, but it's like actually does exactly what you said. It's a Google Earth, kind of like a survey, and it tells you what percentage of your city is covered by trees and what percentage is not, and like shows where the gaps are. I'm gonna track that down. I think you're onto something with that. Like really, it should be pretty clear and pretty easy to determine where we're lacking them and where we should be able to plant them. So, Councilmember Schuler.
This might be a little off topic, but I'm just thinking of like the maintenance issue for homeowners, right? Like you have massive trees, like I do in my yard, and thinking about keeping them healthy and trimmed and safe, right? So they're not, I mean, like my huge oak tree in the front was like hanging over my house and my roof line, and in the back, you know, I have overhead power lines that come in from the
Right.
kind of the right of way in the middle of the backyards. And just thinking about like maintaining some of that, but it can be costly to have, you know, a certified arborist come in. That's who I want, you know, trimming my trees, because they understand
Yeah.
like how to trim trees, how to keep them healthy, what can go, what can't go. You know, so, you know, having some kind of help, and I don't know if like in some of the areas for like CDBG, like if that could be
Good idea.
something that we're helping people maintain in the areas that qualify, because I think that helps the health of the tree, right? Like maintain and continue to move forward, but also like we're thinking about cleanup
Yeah.
afterwards if we have a storm or something like that, or you know high winds come through and then you've got hanging limbs that you can't get to, they're way up there.
Clingers and hangers, I think.
Yeah, I had many of those after, you know, the big storm. And yeah, so just thinking like how do we help residents with that maintenance? Because I mean, like, you know, if you have multiple big trees, that's like that's a couple $1,000s to like keep that and maintain it and, you know, upkeep and
Sure. And I think
so
there's some synergy in between like where we spend CDBG dollars and kind of the older parts of the city where the bigger trees might
Right.
be, the power lines that still go from the line down to connect to the house. My old house was like that too. And it got taken out by a tree that fell on it. Anyway, Councilmember
so-
Graham. Yeah, no, I think that's
I remember chasing this rabbit earlier in the budget discussion, and I think there was some, for CDBG, some question about being able to do that.
okay.
Lisa's
Yeah.
not here, but we should ask her. The other thing I completely spaced out on and meant to, there's like a State of Oklahoma Department of Agricultural, Food and Forestry, and they had a grant application. Did y'all, it's like urban and community forestry assistance grants.
Right, we didn't this year because it's just for, low-income areas, like there's a web tool, and it has to be in high priority, planting areas, or, you know, areas of need. And so we didn't, just because we didn't have any, projects identified in those specific neighborhoods.
So when we talk about using the community development block grant, that may not cover what we think it could, but it seems like if it's in a qualifying census tract or whatever, it should be eligible for this grant. So it could be something if we worked on it this year to identify what projects could go in these low-income neighborhoods, then we could apply for it next year and actually get that
Be
funded.
shovel ready.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking there are CDBG qualifications for maintenance projects on homes for those homeowners that income qualify and in those qualified census tracts. So yeah, I'll tee that up with Lisa and have her flesh that out and see if it's just a thing. Maybe we just need to put it in next year's program for CDBG.
I think it's like if the trees get into your sewer, or if you need like an accessibility ramp, that's what they work those funds through. Because I had somebody in the neighborhood that was like, I thought the city had money to help people trim their trees, and it's like basically what Jason said. If it's in the right of way, we can work on it, but if it's on private property, we really can't.
Yep, CDBG dollars, you know, a lot of those dollars are invested in private homes. So.
But like repairs and accessibility stuff.
And,
I
and
don't
you know,
know
whether or
that
not we can argue that if you don't maintain that tree and all of a sudden now it's in your living room. But yeah, we'll drill down into that and see how
Yeah.
far we can push the envelope.
I definitely think the assistant grants might be helpful. I mean, have you guys ever applied for them before?
From the ODAF?
Yeah.
Yes, we had money, we got money from them last year.
And what was that grant for?
That helped us, with the, rewriting our tree ordinance.
Okay.
in the process of it coming forward.
We'll definitely want to explore helping low-income families maintain trees through the next grant cycle.
Councilmember Holman.
I'd say, yeah, not only do some of our more higher value places have the big trees, but some of the lower income areas have big trees because maybe they don't cut them down or they do just let them go. And in a lot of cases that they don't cause any issue and don't end up falling down are some of the strongest trees.
Right.
But having a way to help homeowners and then focusing on planning for the placement of them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if we're approving a development out of nothing, I mean, it's harder when you're talking about West Lindsay Street or somewhere that's already completely developed and you're trying to fit a bunch of stuff into a little area. But if it's like we're building a new area, then the street layout needs to plan for
Right.
those underground utilities and for the street trees and for sidewalks that aren't gonna get busted by the street trees and whatever it means to do that, and then where the buildings are placed from there.
Yeah. I agree.
And, yeah, focusing on rights of ways like 24th Avenue and University North Park. I don't know what utilities are in that right of way, but it's a very wide right of way.
Right.
I bet Nathan could probably figure out where those utilities are under there, I'll bet you. You probably got a book somewhere.
East side of 24th, I know.
Well, it's also,
Is where I want-
it's also, yeah, that's a great point, like being mindful of also future road widenings.
Yeah.
You know, is you like planting them all along Jenkins just to rip them out in 30 years
So-
because you widen the road.
Yes, and being real mindful of projects that we have upcoming, like Lindsay Street
Right.
between Pickard and Jenkins, and it's a sensitive area. There's existing trees that we want to preserve, and then designing whatever we're doing in a way that allows for more street trees to be planted
Right.
along that section. I mean, it's one of the best things about Norman is driving into the campus on Lindsay Street.
I agree.
And you come out of the commercial and you come into the residential and it's the tree canopy and it's neighborhood and then
Absolutely.
opens out and you're into the campus right there, Dale Tower.
Yep.
So,
It's like when you think about a college campus, that's what
Yes.
you think of, that picturesque,
yeah.
like the trees touching literally over the road. And you just, it only gets that way after 100 years of having
Yeah.
trees growing in the same
So
spot.
like in that case, the way the street is designed,
Yep.
the curbs, the
Yep.
sidewalks that we're putting in, they're designed around those trees.
Yeah.
And in a way that allows us to put more in,
I love it.
you know, so.
Yep. That's exactly the goal. And I think, I mean, that would be my direction for staff, Ms. Hudson, really just kind of taking a fresh look at our, landscaping ordinance and everything and seeing what opportunities are there, maybe where we can, again, if it's a 1-inch tree and we change it to a 2-inch tree or something, just really giving us a better chance of the trees we plant succeeding, opening up more opportunities to plant more trees in different places. How do we retrofit certain projects to add trees? Making sure we're calling for the right trees in the ordinance, like really just almost an overhaul of it. And I don't think we need to rewrite the ordinance, but just looking for opportunities and pitfalls.
Making sure our forester has the
Absolutely.
tools that are needed
Yep.
to, for a city this size especially.
Right.
So,
And again, just reiterate, the idea is it's not to create something cumbersome, but something that actually really just creates value across the city. So I think homeowners, consumers, developers, property owners, I think this is something that hopefully everybody should see the value of and get on board with if structured properly. So, are there any other thoughts or comments? All right, I'm seeing none. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you, guys.